On this episode, we're talking mod end connectors, PoE, stranded versus non stranded. We're getting the lowdown from the experts. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, IT personnel, and even customers. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those two simple little steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can get this information out to more people so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. Thursday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? We do a live stream. It's on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok. It's on almost every platform where I answer your questions that you submit to me and you get the RCDD's perspective. Also, while this show is free and will always remain free, if you find value in this content, would you mind clicking on this QR code right there? And would you mind supporting the show? You can buy me a cup of coffee. You can schedule a 15-minute one-on-one Zoom call with me after hours, of course, or you can just send a donation, help pay offset some of the costs for this show. As I said, we're talking mod ends. It seems that simple little piece of plastic on either cable, how can it be so complex? If it's wrong, what kind of stuff can cause? There's a lot of controversy about mod end connectors. Is it stranded conductor? Is it solid conductor? Will it work with PoE? Is it plenum rated? As I've said many times, I can wax poetic about pulling, terminating, installing, and designing cable plants, and I can tell you how to crimp an end on a cable, but I just figured I would just get an expert in here to answer the questions. So I reached out to Blake Talley, and Blake is going to help us answer some of them tough questions. Welcome to the show, Blake.
Yeah, Chuck, thank you for having me. I was scanning the QR code so I could support the show.
There you go. There you go. So for those who don't know you and your company, would you mind just giving us the 1-minute overview of who you are and why you guys are such experts on mod ends?
Yeah, well, my name is Blake Talley. I'm the vice president and partner at Go Simply Connect. Go Simply Connect is kind of the umbrella company for our brand Simply 45, which is a connectivity, head-to-head connectivity solution portfolio. My business partner and I have been in the connector side of the business for over 10 years, working at companies like Platinum Tools, back when it was a family-owned business before it sold to private equity. My other two partners are in the cable side of the business. So it really brings a lot of, engineering weight to bear, because not only do we have the connectivity side and the connector side of the business, kind of that acumen, we also have engineering on the cable side, which is kind of unique. There's not a lot of companies out there that really tap into both of those, sides of the business to make sure that the connectors that they develop, are designed to work on the category cable, right? So it's been a great thing for us for the last 4 years. But yeah, been in the business a long time selling pass-through connectors and standard connectors and APAC, every kind of connector you can imagine we've been selling. So
A lot of people don't realize all of the effort and all the engineering and ingenuity that goes into making such a simple little thing as those mod ends.
yeah,
Is there really a difference between all those mod ends?
there is a difference for sure. I mean, I think you have to kind of look at, what are they trying to accomplish, right? I mean, people look at them as just a small little ice cube that goes on an Ethernet cable, but for professional integrators, 95% of all network downtime is a result of either the cable or the connector, right? And so that's a huge opportunity for truck rollbacks. Truck rollbacks equal unhappy customers, equal lost profit, lost time for integrators. So, while it may just look like, an RJ45 or APAC connector is all the same, they're not, right? There's an incredible amount of engineering that goes into these to make sure that they don't fail, especially when used with all of the different category cables that are out there today. I used to make a joke with people when I was talking about this that, I had a buddy back in college who bought like one of the first H2 Hummers that came out, and he immediately went and bought these huge 24-inch rims for this car. And he took those rims to the tire company, and no tire manufacturer even manufactured tires for this car yet, right? So
Hmm.
those rims sat in our living room for 2 years before a tire company caught up to the rim manufacturer and actually produced a tire for it. And in our world, that is very, very similar with these cable companies. They come out with all of these claims, they develop all of these cables, but they don't really ever come to a connector company first and say, "Hey, I've got this cable idea," like for instance, the game changer cable with Page Electric. I'm going to try to design this Cat 6 that goes twice as far. Do you have a connector that's capable of actually helping us, accomplish this? Right. So the connector company is always kind of like in tow behind the cable companies trying to figure out, okay, what claims are they making and how can we develop a connector that helps them achieve what they're going for? Right. It makes it easier for the installers to actually be successful with that cable. Right. So one of the things that we've done, at Go Simply Connect is partner with cable companies like Page so that when they are in development of new products, we actually have an inside scoop on that and we can come out and do our R&D to make sure that we provide a solution that works with these types of cables, right? And so I think that's unique, the industry partnerships that we've created. But it makes it where you can depend on our products and on, that's an important aspect of, what we're all trying to create out here as connector companies.
I was teaching the class today, and I was telling the class, just because we work in the communications industry doesn't mean we communicate, right? And
That's funny. That's
yeah,
true.
but it's true, unfortunately, right? It's the sad truth, and that's why I love when I hear, when I talk to people in manufacturing, that they're working with other manufacturers because when you two collaborate, you end up getting a better product as
Yeah.
opposed to trying to, wait somebody to come out with something and try to, back into it and figure it out. I was kind of glad to hear you talk about game changer cable because I get asked that question a lot. Maybe we'll dive into a little bit of that. So I've got some common
Yeah.
questions I hit all the time, and
Okay.
let's cover them questions. So the first question that I get a lot is there a Cat 6A field terminatable mod end?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a standard version that's a non-pass-through. We have a pass-through version and a version that we have that's called a Pro Series, which is a hybrid version that's really designed for PoE applications. But there's even field plugs out there that you can buy that will do Cat 6A wire as well. There's Cat 7, Cat 7A wire now, especially over in the European markets that we see a lot. And we have, there's connector solutions for those as well. So, like I said, Cat 8's coming down the road and,
Right.
any number of other technologies. We try to stay ahead of these, cable companies so that we have a solution so that integrators can successfully use that wire. So, there is definitely a Cat 6A mod plug for sure.
I ask every time I teach a class, I always ask for the opinions of the technicians. And one of the questions I always ask is who prefers pass through, who prefers the traditional style. And I find if I average them out across all the classes I teach, it's probably about 50-50. And I usually ask, well, why do you prefer one over the other? Because like I said, I'm always interested in learning why people prefer things. So let me ask you this question. This wasn't actually not on the list. In general terms, and you can, if you want, you can speak from just what your company are there more pass through sold or more traditional sold?
I think it's at this point in time, it's really a matter of personal preference. It's also a matter of like what you're planning on doing with the connector, right? So certain applications, like if I'm going to go install a voice over IP phone system, it's not a lot of bandwidth that's needed for that. There's not power essentially, or very low power if there is. And so you don't have to really worry about any type of electrical arcing issues or any near and far crosstalk issues on that application. So for that, you could kind of use whatever you prefer to use, right? Standard connectors, especially like in the AV industry, have typically been used on the higher bandwidth installations, right? Because you're trying to really protect any outside influence, reduce near and far crosstalk, et cetera, because you're really maximizing, what bandwidth you're trying to pull from that wire. That's why we developed the Pro Series connectors to kind of have a hybrid of the both, so you get the best of both worlds. And we do some of these things in partnership again with like companies like HD Base T, organizations like them who are out there pushing the envelope in terms of what these cables can do for the performance they're looking for. And as they come out with these new specs, they have challenges, right? They have connectivity challenges to make sure that the average installer can actually install the category cable in a connector well enough to achieve their goal, right? Because just because they have the ability to hit these higher end specs doesn't mean that everybody out there doing the work and installing the cable is going to have success doing that, right? So you have to, at some level, kind of play to the lowest common denominator, and that's really what the pass-through does, right? It kind of levels the playing field for people that, maybe aren't doing these types of installations, every day, to have a connector solution that allows you to very quickly and easily have a high performing connection and a reliable connection, right? But the standard connectors, starting back in the late 70s, Western Electric, Stewart Stamping, that's really where those derive from. They've been out for a long, long time, right? And then the pass-through was patented in the late 90s. So there's a lot of old school installers that, they would never use a pass-through because they can do it in their sleep and they have confidence that when they do these terminations, they do them correctly every time. But even those older guys, we see this a lot of trade shows, as they got older, their eyes are failing them a little bit. They have to put their readers on, and, pass-throughs are easy. It's easy to make sure they wire it correctly. They can see the standard before they terminate. They know they have the TI standard correct, whether they're using, A or B, and it's worth it for them to use the pass-through. So I really think it's a, not only is it situational, but, it kind of depends on what technology you're installing and, what you're trying to accomplish.
It's funny. I never put two and two together until you just said it. When I asked that question, you're absolutely right. The people who I can seem to remember answering those questions, those who prefer the traditional style are typically older installers. I never put that together until you just said that.
Yeah.
The younger installers do like the pass-through connectors. They really do.
Yeah. Well, they're easy to do. It's easy to be trained on. A lot of guys that are just getting into the industry, and a lot of trainers like yourself, have started to adopt it. And that's what they were trained on when they went through these classes, right? So they don't even really know how to put on a standard connector because they've never had to do it. And that's okay with us, right? I mean, we love the pass through. It really does help, people have success out there and reduce that network downtime that we're all trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for somebody who has never terminated a traditional one, if they cut their teeth and were trained on the pass through, I could certainly see the frustration going from a pass through to a traditional. Oh,
Oh, yeah.
I can certainly see the issue there. And one of the things I will say is crimpers have come a long way. My first crimper, and I always usually joke about this in class. My first crimper I bought from Radio Shack. It shows how old I am, right? It
Hey, I
was
went to Radio Shack. I know what those are.
Yeah, yeah, and it was this plastic thing, and it didn't crimp right after about the third connector, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the crimpers nowadays are, I mean, they are metal, machine driven. They're very precise. I really love the crimpers, and I have one of yours.
Yeah.
One of the you guys manufacturer that somebody gave to me, and I'm just super impressed with how far along the crimpers have come. I really am.
Yeah.
You mentioned AV. One of the things I see quite a lot is people doing like outside plant cameras and stuff like that. Is there a mod end that's IP rated?
So there's not a mod in that's IP rated. Obviously, you're trying to install these in a waterproof or watertight, NEMA box or something like that, right? We do a number of manufacturers, including ourselves, have an IP68 rated coupler in a panel mount version as well that you can use, in conjunction with a watertight box to kind of give you that, water intrusion rating. But the connector itself, there is no way to really do that because, as you can imagine, if you have water spilled in any electrical port, you're going to have it short out, right? So there's got to be some sort of enclosure that's used in conjunction with the connector in order for that to be successful.
So you mentioned IP68. What does that really mean?
So IP68 just kind of loosely is being able to have a connector inside of, so something like a housing that's like this, right? That can be put 1.5 meters underwater for longer than 30 minutes, right? That's going to be your IP68 rating, right? So it prevents any kind of dust intrusion. But generally speaking, that's what we do. And, when we tested items like this, my business partner put it in his pool for, a day and then pulled it out and it worked perfectly, right? So a lot of guys use these for, burying underground for certain things. They're used in broadcast a lot, when there's temporary, like the Academy Awards and there's wire running everywhere outside and it's exposed to the elements and they don't know if it's going to rain or not. And they're doing the red carpet. That's a lot of times when these products are used.
Oh, I could see a business expense there. We need to build a pool so we can do some IP testing.
Yeah, that's luckily it didn't show up on his expense report, but
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Another common application I see mod ends for are access points, right? And a lot of times they're mounted, in the ceiling, and a lot of times those ceilings can be plenum rated. And an installer can get in a lot of trouble if they're putting non-plenum rated products in plenum rated ceilings. Is there a mod end that's plenum rated for the applications like access points?
yeah, there's not a like an official measure for this, right? Like there is with coax wire. But generally speaking, the UL94 VO rating is the rating that you would need for plenum rating commercial use, right? All of our connectors, for example, our material spec is a UL94 VO rated material. And just to kind of give you some idea of what that UL94 VO rating means, there's actually a test that you can do, right? And actually, if you go to our Instagram on, at Go Simply Connect, you can actually see us doing this test on our connectors. But essentially, there's two flame tests, and the reason you want to have this UL94 VO rating is, for fire rating, right? If you have these types of products in an air handling space and they catch on fire and burst into flame and create smoke, then that smoke can be carried throughout the building very quickly, causing the fire to spread, causing dangers for firefighters, et cetera. So, that's really why we're trying to, create this material spec that doesn't, make that happen. But the UL94 VO rating is essentially when you take a connector, you hang it about this high above a Bunsen burner, you flip the burner on, and you totally torch that connection or that connector for 10 seconds, and then you immediately move it off the flame after 10 seconds. And if it self extinguishes in less than 10 seconds, then you pass test one. Then you move it immediately back over the flame, you torch it for another 10 seconds, you move it off, and you hope it self extinguishes before 10 seconds again, right? So there's two flame tests that happen. Underneath that Bunsen burner is a bunch of cotton, right? Now, if anything falls from the connector that's flaming and burns the cotton, you fail the test, right? So it's kind of a multi-part test, whether it self-extinguishes fast enough or if it drops any material that could cause the fire to spread, right? And so if you look at the video on our Instagram, for instance, you'll see that our connectors self-extinguish in a matter of seconds. Nothing falls, so therefore they can be used in plenum spaces and for that purpose.
I think I missed my calling because I remember as a young kid, I hate to admit this, I am part pyro. That's one of the reasons why I went into as a volunteer firefighter for many years. But I remember as a small kid, I used to take lighters and burn my plastic cars and just watch the flames go. So I could just see that. I missed my calling. I could be a official UL tester for mod ends.
Yeah. Well, and definitely don't put those cars up in air handling spaces in your commercial properties when you're doing it because they would not be plenum rated.
Yeah, exactly. So, is there a difference between mod ends designed for horizontal cabling versus mod ends for patch cables?
So typically, make sure I understand your question correctly. So horizontal cabling is essentially solid conductors versus a patch
Yes,
cord, which is a
exactly.
stranded
Yeah,
conductor. Yeah, there are. It really relates to the contact design, right? So there's a host of different contacts and IDCs that are out on the market that have been developed over the years. We at Go Simply Connect believe that our offset three prong trident is the correct contact for both solid and stranded. We tried to consolidate that to where we don't have to burden our distributors and our integrators that use our products with having multiple connectors that all look the same with different contact designs, right? But the long and short of it is the opposing blades, when it goes down and terminates that conductor, prevents any torsion, right? Any twist of that wire, and essentially, makes it where, you're going to have a higher reliability of that termination for, both stranded and solid wire, but you don't want to have a lateral, contact design, right? Because that doesn't, give you any protection, so if this is a conductor, so to speak, a three-prong contact comes down and holds it like this, you can see the amount of surface area and how there's no twist on that at all versus let's say like a two-prong lateral contact that comes down and it doesn't even really capture the contact. It kind of sits on top and then any movement you can see how it flips out.
right.
That just little bit of engineering makes a huge difference when it comes to long-term connectivity because believe it or not, category cables are moved frequently, right?
Oh,
Once you do
yeah.
an
Yeah.
installation, you pull the rack out, you have a security camera, sometimes there's guys wiring it, moving it, wind moves it, animals move it, and you don't want to have that contact fail, causing any, and you also don't want to have heat build up at that, right? Because if you have a contact design like this, you can see how easy it can pivot there, right? And that little bit of movement creates friction, and friction creates heat, and heat can lead to intermittence and electrical arcing, right? So it's very important, we feel, to use a three-prong contact that really holds that wire securely and prevents, any of that friction from occurring.
So are you using the three-prong contact for both the solid and the stranded?
Yeah, we use it for all types. Yeah, for both solid and stranded wires design. That's what I was saying. It makes it easy for our integrators that use our product, because whether they're using it for patch cords or they're using it for the horizontal runs, they don't have to switch up and have two different types of connectors in their truck, right? It works for everything.
I tell you what, as service technicians' point of view, because that's one less thing I got to carry in my truck.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's really, my business partners and I really focus on trying to optimize SKUs for you guys, right? We want to have the, least amount of SKUs in your truck to do the most amount of work. I mean, you mentioned crimp tools earlier. We have a patent on our crimp tool that allows us to use it for stranded, I mean, not stranded, for, standard non-pass-through connectors, pass-through connectors. You can use it for our shielded connectors, the way our connectors are designed, both the internal and external ground. So now you have one tool that does every single connector that we manufacture versus, like when I worked at Platinum, we had 4 tools that you had to use, right? Whether you were using their original pass-through series, their standard series, so, when we started this company, we kind of wanted to move away from, you having to support 4 different tools in your bag to do the same job, right? So, but yeah, I mean, it's part of what we try to accomplish to make life easy for you guys, so you don't have to make sure you don't have the stuff in your truck, and you have to run back to the office, get it, and you're wasting time and money, doing that, right?
Because your time is money. If I have to go back to the office or go to the local supply house, that's money for time and money for driving the vehicle and gas and fuel
Oh, yeah.
and then how do you calculate the customer's loss of confidence because you didn't have the right thing on your truck?
Yeah.
You
Well, and
can't.
you're also looking for people to become absolute experts at all this technology, including the distributor. When you walk in and you say, "Hey, I need these, I need this connector. Does this work in my, this crimp tool?" And you're expecting that distributor salesperson to know everything about that. Oh, yeah, that crimp tool, yeah. I mean, most generally speaking, you want to create crimp products or crimp tools and connectors that are TI rated standard, so they fit in all of these different formats, right?
Right.
So it's a TIA standard that we're building our products to. But there are manufacturers out there that have products that are not to that standard, and you might be using them every day and not even know it.
That's got to be a huge challenge trying to make as few connectors as possible fit as many cables as possible. I'll give you an example. Cat 5e. It's generally 24 gauge, but they do make a 22 gauge Cat 5e.
Yeah.
How do you make a connector that can fit that wide range of size of conductors?
Well, I think in today's world, it's not as easy just to say, "Oh, I have a Cat 5 wire and I need to go buy a Cat 5 connector," right? So we'll use the game changer, going back to that cable. That's a Cat 6 cable that has a 22 gauge conductor and not a 23 gauge conductor. So if you're just buying it off the shelf and you're like, "Oh, it's a Cat 6 that goes twice as far, I'm gonna go buy a Cat 6 connector," you're gonna get out in the field and the conductors are never gonna seat correctly, right?
Exactly.
And so what we've developed is we call it kind of cable rated connectors. All of our connectors can pass up to 10 gig, right? Which is essentially what we're trying to accomplish with copper, until you get up into the higher Cat 7, 7A wires, right? But so all of our connectors are essentially cable rated, right? And so there are differences between the connectors, for certain long distance runs, et cetera. So, I don't know if you know, but for like a Cat 6 wire, for instance, it goes up 1 gig, to 328 feet, right?
Mhm.
But it can
Right.
actually get 10 gigs at a shorter run, like
Ex
37 meters, right? So
exactly.
if you know these things, you're like, okay, then I can use, a Cat 6 connector on Cat 5, et cetera, right? To kind of like equal out that math. But, generally speaking, you need to know what your conductor range is. You need to know what your jacket OD is, what your insulation is. So all of the information on these cable manufacturers' spec sheets have become more and more important so that you can make sure that you mate the right connector size to the cable that you're looking for, right? So if you have a Cat 6 that goes twice as far with a 22 gauge conductor, you know to use a staggered design connector that traditionally would be considered a Cat 6A connector, but it's going to accomplish the job for you and make your life a lot easier out in the field when you're trying to terminate it.
Right. So let's say there's a new installer out there in the field who maybe only has, a year or 2 years experience, and they don't do mod ends that often. And they got a job or somewhere where they're gonna have to crimp some of those. And they don't really know which one to order. Do you guys offer any kind of a service or support where somebody can call you and say, look, I've got XYZ manufacturer cable. Here's the part number. Which is the best mod end for that? Do you offer any kind of support like that?
Yeah, we have a couple ways that you can do that. Right on our homepage at gosimplyconnect.com, you'll see a connector selector guide. And if you pull that PDF up, it'll tell you exactly what conductor ranges each of our connectors are designed for. So essentially, you just pull up the spec sheet for the cable you're using, look at those three important metrics, compare it to our chart, and then you can see exactly what connectors, whether it's a pass-through, non-pass-through, or one of our Pro Series connectors that you can use that's compatible for that cable. We also have a chat feature on our website where you can go to the website and just chat with us, and it's essentially like a text message to us that we can get back to you really quickly. We look at a lot of spec sheets. We also have a lot of our product pages have certification reports with specific wire that's very common in the industry. So if you're using, for example, a Genesis cable, you can go to any of our product pages and actually see which connector fits that and a certification report from a Landtech 4S certifier, so you can see what performance that you're, generally going to get if it's installed correctly.
Oh, that's cool. Because like I said, I can certainly see a technician getting overwhelmed pretty quickly, especially with, like I said, when you start talking multiple size conductors, different type of manufacturers, game changer versus, Cat 5e that's rated for PoE versus regular Cat 5e. I can certainly see a technician getting overwhelmed very easily
Yeah.
with that kind of stuff. It's I get confused sometimes,
Yeah.
and I've been in the industry for 4 decades, you
Yeah,
know.
we actually have a segment that we do on our Instagram page called a masterclass, and we have, over the years, we've kind of captured some really interesting wires that people have called in and said, "I do not know how to terminate this," and so part of that masterclass series is kind of terminating these outlier wires that are just crazy that you never really see that often, but people come across in the field and they just can't do it. So even for us as, people who have been in the industry and do this day in and day out, we always come across, certain situations where there's not a connector that's really been designed for this yet, right? This
Right.
is not a wire that's been brought to our attention and, good luck. I hate to say it, but it's not going to be easy to terminate out there. And then that's when you typically get into like the field plugs that, can cost $10 a piece, to the
Right.
dealer to do those harder wires, which is not that big of a deal unless you have 1,000 drops, and obviously that adds up very quickly. But what's the time and failure rate take? If you're constantly re-terminating and cutting it off and not being able to terminate it either. So
Right.
it's interesting when we go to trade shows. People sometimes come by the booth and they say, "Man, I've been using these, connectors off Amazon. I'm having all these failures." And I'm like, "Well, you should use a connector that's really designed for this, that's a little bit higher end." And they're like, "Ah, it's your connectors are like 45 cents a piece, you know?" And it's like, well, I get
Mhm.
that you're using a connector that's 15 cents a piece, but no one has ever retired, at the end of their career and been like, "Wow, I really am glad I saved, that 20, 30 cents on those connectors on that job."
Right.
It's all about truck rollbacks, right? You're never gonna get to your retirement goals by like cutting corners on a 45-cent connector, but you definitely will if you don't have 10 rollbacks on associated with that job that's taking you 4 hours each time to try to figure out what failed, right? So definitely use high quality infrastructure products. It's amazing to me, like a lot of these equipment manufacturers that we deal with on a regular basis, they have all this equipment that's going to do 10 gigs and it's going to do PoE and it's like, a $2,000 network switch and you've got security cameras that are 8K and you have all this expensive equipment, but none of them really dictate to their customers like what the standard is for installing it. They kind of leave it up to the integrator to decide, okay, well, you're the expert, you know what wire to pull, you know how to terminate it, right? But it's kind of the equivalent of, designing this like high speed train, that you spent billions of dollars designing, and then you put it on a broken track, and then you sit around and scratch your head like, why am I not seeing this bullet train go 300 miles an hour? And it's like your track was not designed for it.
Right.
And so the cable infrastructure is not where you want to skimp out, right? Like, and it's not a big upgrade to go from a 20-cent connector to a 45-cent connector and have it where you never have to worry about it again.
So you mentioned the Cat 7 connectors. Do you guys make Cat 7 mod ends?
Yeah, we do.
I didn't know that. I looked at your website before, and I just don't remember seeing that. Is there a lot of those being sold? Because I mean, I know that's a European thing, and I know there are some jobs in the US that may use Cat 7. And this is another one of those questions I ask every single class. Has anybody ever installed Cat 7? Has anybody ever installed Cat 7A? And generally, I get in a week's worth of training, maybe 2 people say that they've done Cat 7, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not, you know, in the US and domestic markets, we don't see it a lot, but we do a trade show called ISE over in Barcelona every year. And one of the reasons we do that show is because Europe is generally a little bit ahead of us in terms of some of these technologies that are coming out on the market. And so we do sell a lot of 7A connectors in that market. We have a lot of really good conversations with European integrators and what they're doing with it. And so it's really kind of helped us stay ahead of the curve, for when it does come, to the US. But yeah, it's not something that you're going to see a lot of in the
Right.
US market yet. I mean, quite honestly, we just now kind of crested where we're seeing more Cat 6 connectors sold than Cat 5e, right? I mean, that's really where we're at here domestically. Um, and we're, Cat 6A has been out on the market for years and years, and
Right.
it's just, it's a more challenging cable to work with. It's more expensive, and there really just hasn't been the, you know, network devices that are really needing it yet. And now there are, right? Now, especially in the AV side of stuff.
That's our industry. It's always done that. I mean, Cat 3 was like that. It took forever for it to be retired.
Yeah.
That's another place where you see a lot of arguments on the internet. I mean, the internet seems to be an argument haven, but people are like, well, who still installs Cat 5e? Well, there's still a lot of Cat 5e being installed. It is tailing off. There's less and less being sold each year, and at some point, it will go legacy, just like the Cat 3 did. Right? It
Yeah.
definitely disappear at some point. Especially when
Well,
you look at Cat 5e and Cat 6, as far as the standards are concerned, they both will tell you they can do 1 gig up to 328 feet. So why would you even choose Cat 5e?
yeah.
But it's cheaper. That's where the people are still buying that stuff. And I think the biggest markets for 5e is residential,
Hmm.
because a lot of people are using 5e for their house.
Yeah. There's a lot of it out there. And there's also a lot of it already in houses and commercial buildings throughout the country. So sometimes, depending on what devices you're putting into that building, you may not need to upgrade to Cat 6 and you just want to use the Cat 5. So there's always going to be wire out there that you guys as integrators are going to have to deal with, right? Those connectors are going to stay on the shelves, at least in our warehouses, for a while.
Right. And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you can do, 10 gig over Cat 6, but it's going to be a shorter distance. And you think about most residential installs, most of those runs are way shorter than the 328 feet for that channel.
Oh
I
yeah.
think the average run length the average run length for cabling period is about 150 feet. But when you get into houses, that my house is not 150 feet long. If I had a 150-foot piece of cable, I could almost loop my house.
Yeah, I was going to say you probably had a guy that went like this in the walls with it, right? So, right, exactly.
Exactly. So, you mentioned the standards and stuff. So I'm assuming the standards will tell you what size the mod ends have, because they have to be able to fit inside of an APHC or RJ45 for us old people.
Yeah.
Um, does the crimper that you're using to crimp those mod ends on, does it have to match the manufacturer of the mod end?
No, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, all of our products are manufactured to a TIA standard, right? And that standard exists so that RJ45s fit all the keystones fit all of the racks, right? It makes everything compatible in our industry, right? Like I said, there are companies out there that have non-TIA compliant plugs, right? And keystones, et cetera. So you want to always be cognizant when you're looking at purchasing a product that it's, has that credential on the, on the jar. Our tools are designed again for that TI standard. So, they're definitely manufactured to where they will work with other people's products, right? But, we, of course, when we do our R&D, test it on our stuff, right? That's first and foremost. We
Yeah.
design that tool for our products to
Right.
make sure that our performance on our products is as high as it can be. And so we always kind of have a little disclaimer, like, if you're using our connectors, you should use our tools, right?
Right.
And one way we actually encourage, integrators to do that is we came out with this program a few years ago, and there's been companies out there now that are kind of knocking it off. We really believe that you need to have the right tool for the job. And
Yes.
so if you buy 2 jars of connectors, we actually will give you that tool for free,
Oh,
right?
wait,
To make
what?
sure.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Where do I sign up for this? I'm gonna go buy me 2 jars right now.
Well, we offer it through most of our distributors. We have a link to it on our website, but we want to make sure that, if you're using, our products, that you're using the right tool, right?
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
our products can be adversely affected if you're using a cheap crimp frame that you
Right.
got. And a lot of times people go to Home Depot and Lowe's and on Ace Hardware and a lot of these companies, but a lot of those products that you see in the low voltage section, are kind of designed for the do-it-yourselfers, right? The DIY channel,
Right.
right? And we're really a professional grade product.
Thank you.
That's what we
Yes.
manufacture, right? So, and I get the point of having those more affordable products because we also have a more affordable crimp frame for kind of a DIY market, because somebody who's doing, 10 connectors and that's all they need to do doesn't want to go spend $100 on a crimp frame in order to do that. And they're not even going to buy 2 jars to even get the one free because they don't need 200 connections to do 10, right?
Right.
So every crimp frame kind of has its role in the ecosystem. If you're a professional integrator and you're out there doing this day in and day out, and your reputation is on the line, day in and day out, you know, go get the right tool, right?
Right.
Make
Yeah.
sure you have the right tool and then maintain that tool, right? If you're
Yes.
using pass-throughs, change the blade, right? It's a $6 product to change, and it's the single most important piece of maintenance you can do on a pass-through crimp frame. And we've made it easy on our tool by having little cartridges and a Phillips screw, and it's pre-calibrated. You just snap it in, and it's a done deal. But we really want to encourage you to do that. Our Pro Series tool even has blade storage built into the handle so that you always have a blade with you. But just be cognizant of some of these things, because it's amazing. I'll be at trade shows, and this happened especially when I was in my previous life before we started this company. People would come up with tools they've been using for 10 years, and I'd be like, "How often do you change the blade?" And they're like, never." And I'm like, "Well, you know, that's that's
Hey,
the first thing you need to do to make
you
sure you don't have these problems that
you
you're
just
sitting here
you
telling me
just
about."
you just taught this cable dog something. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, like I said, I suffered with that old that old Mod N crimp tool from Radio Shack for years, and just I just put up with it,
yeah.
and I didn't know that that you could do that. So let me ask you this: how many crimp cycles can you get through for one of the cartridges?
Now, generally speaking, we say about 20 jars or 2,000 connections, is what you want to, so it's not like you need to change it every day or
Right.
anything, right? But it depends on the wire. If you're out there doing a lot of Cat 6A wire, then I would change it, every 1,000 terminations, because you're cutting through 22 gauge wire instead of 24 gauge with Cat 5. Depends on if you're using a shielded wire. Sometimes the insulation, whether it's, PVC insulation or foam insulation, there's so many variables within how these, category cables are constructed that you want to make sure your blade sharp. I mean, if you're using pass through connectors, it just kind of is part of what you have to do to be successful with them. And a lot of the failures that people see out in the field, even with electrical arcing issues, stem from the fact that they've never changed their blade. And as
Right.
you know, copper is you know, metal that holds its memory, right? So if a blade comes down and shears off something very sharp, it cuts it clean, right? And it keeps that conductor around. If it comes down and it's a dull blade, it just kind of like rips at it. And guess what? You get copper that kind of is distorted and ripped out the front of the connector, and it leaves a burr that can cause electrical arcing between conductors, right? And that's an issue that happens all the time. And if you plug that poorly made connector into a $1,500 at Lona switch, guess what? You're going to get a short, right? And so that's not a good thing to do. And that's why when we developed the Pro Series connector and patented the Cap 45, we really wanted to prevent that failure and people not changing the blades indefinitely, right? I wanted to make sure it was a done deal. And what that Cap 45 does is it just seals off the front of the connector, making sure there's no copper exposed at the top of that RJ45. So you get, all the benefits of a pass-through connector, being able to check your TI standard, minimize the untwist by making sure your jacket is seated right up underneath the contacts. But you get the security of a, standard mod plug that doesn't have that copper exposed at the front. Right. So it's a hybrid connector and it's been very, very well received. It's the only connector on the market right now that can wear the HD base T badge, in the AV side of things for PoE distribution. So it's kind of solved that problem.
Yeah, that could be up to 90 watts, when you're talking, HD base T stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And you kind of answered my question as I thought it. I mean, we must be on the same wavelength, because as you're talking, I was like, I'm thinking in my head, I know most technicians aren't counting they don't have a hash mark for every time they crimp a mod end.
No, of course not.
And they're not keeping track even of the boxes. That'd probably be the easiest way. Just keep track of the number of the boxes you buy. And so I was going to ask, well, what are some of the things that show up that gives the tech the indication that maybe not to be replaced? And you answered it as I was thinking the question.
Yeah. I mean, use a connector like the Pro Series. It doesn't matter if it is a little dull, because you're covering up that opportunity for any electrical current to get into that front of that connector when you plug it into an active PoE port, right? So there are ways to obviously, and it also, if you put it on a certifier, that Pro Series Cap 45 reduces near and far crosstalk as well. So if you're looking to maximize just the properties of the Cap 45, really, that seals it off and it prevents, any of those conductors that are close together at the end of that connector from, causing any interference, right? From any electrical interference to get in there. And that increases overhead, which means that ultimately the network you're installing is going to be capable of being upgraded in the future without you having to rerun a different category cable, et cetera. So there's a lot of benefits to, using a proper connector design, right?
Right.
And the cost from going from a pass-through series to our Pro Series is minimal, less than a couple pennies a connector. So, and if you're doing a voice over IP phone system and you don't have to worry about it, then don't put the cap on, right? But it gives you that security that that if you that insurance policy, so to speak, in every jar, that if you're, a lot of times these integrators, they don't necessarily know a year from now who's going to come along and use that wire for an entirely different purpose, right? So just because they're installing a voice over IP phone doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be connected to a voice over IP phone.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, exactly. So that was actually the last question: is, are pass-throughs safe for PoE? So it sounds to me like your answer is yes. If you and there's some ones that are better for it and then some that are worse for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I answer that question, in kind of a couple different parts, right? So, we believe that if you have the correct contact design, which is that offset 3-prong trident, that goes a long way to securing and making sure there's no friction on that conductor when that cable moves. Therefore, you're not going to get that heat, which causes electrical arcing, right? Preventing, that copper from being distorted, by using a sharp blade is another way to ensure that you get a good, cut and termination on your pass-through connector. And then the third way is by using our Pro Series connector, which essentially caps off and prevents that copper from being exposed and any electrical current from arcing. So, if you're really concerned about PoE, use the Pro Series. And if you, have never had an issue with it, because you've been using pass-throughs forever, it's probably because you're a good integrator that's changing their blades and, installing the connector correctly, and you're not having these issues, right? So, but yeah, they definitely are issues out there for sure. And we see them all the time. We get people sending us pictures of, they installed a camera and 5 weeks later they go back and guess what? They pull the connector out and there's an electrical short on it. And they're like, what happened? Well, that's what happened. Someone moved that cable, that little friction happened, and all of a sudden you get an electrical arc. So, yeah, definitely pass-throughs can be used for PoE. Just know what you're doing and use the right connector.
Oh, great, man. What a fantastic show, man. Who knew there's so much stuff behind mod end connectors?
I get that a lot. Every time we talk to somebody at a trade show, they're like, I had no idea. I just thought an RJ45 was an RJ45. And
Exactly.
it absolutely is not true. There's a ton of R&D obviously that go into this. And, my partners and I have developed an entire company that does nothing but work on these types of problems. And, that's what we love about trade shows is interacting with integrators. Doing podcasts like this is awesome because the feedback we get is how we develop new product. And that's really how we continue to innovate is by learning what issues people are having in the field and solving them. Right.
Right.
So, we have an open arm policy. Bring all your problems and connectivity issues to us and let us try to see if we can't figure out with our engineers how to fix it.
Nice. I love that attitude, and I really love that Instagram thing that you were talking about. I'm gonna have to check that out after I get off the
Yeah,
show.
yeah, definitely follow us at Go Simply Connect. We try to pride ourselves on being a company, having worked in this industry a long time. There's a lot of people out there that just say, "Oh yeah, this is 10 gig rated." Oh, really? Like, how do you know that? And part of the reason that we partnered with Trend Networks, which is a super high-end portfolio of every kind of tester you could ever imagine to develop Simply Test, is because we want to make sure that every single claim that we make has been tested and proven, and we have reports that you can see on our website that show our Instagram that show what we're talking about, even down to the UL 94 VO rating. We don't just say that our connectors are UL 94 VO rated. We literally light them on fire and show you that we have that rating, right? So that's really just kind of a mission of us is to make sure that we can always substantiate our claims, right?
Yep. Absolute pleasure having you on, Blake. I appreciate you taking the time and coming on and help dropping some knowledge on people who listen to my show. You certainly educated this old guy because I didn't know that you could replace the cartridges. I
Well,
learned
if that is the only thing that comes from this interview, it was a job well done and an hour worth spent because that
yes.
is such a crucial part of being successful out there, no matter what connector platform you're using.
Well, that was an interesting conversation. Who knew there was so much information, so much research, so much engineering into those little plastic mod ends? That was absolutely cool. I certainly hope you look up Blake and his company and help support them because it sounds to me like they're a class act. I really I'm gonna have to make sure I check them out at Infocom when I go over there next month. And I also appreciate you being patient with the audio because as you can tell, I'm not in my home studio this week because I'm recording on the road. I brought a separate microphone, but I forgot to bring the USB adapter. Stupid MacBook Pros. You got to have that stupid adapter. I forgot to bring the adapter. So I appreciate each and everybody listening to this show. And until next time, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.